Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so what if I told you the complex, fiercely guarded rituals of ancient high magic were actually just early forms of psychoanalysis? Pretty wild, right? Well, today we're diving into the fascinating life of Israel Regardie and his radical 1938 book, The Middle Pillar. He dared to bridge the massive gap between ancient occult practices and the modern therapist's couch. This was a completely pivotal moment in history. The secretive world of Western ceremonial magic was suddenly thrust right into the public eye. Regardie proposed something entirely unheard of at the time. He suggested that the intricate rituals of high magic weren't just supernatural parlor tricks, but actually a sophisticated, though misunderstood, subdivision of the newly emerging science of psychology. It was an absolute paradigm shift. So, Regardie's core thesis was bold. He firmly believed that ceremonial magic and psychology were, at their core, essentially the exact same discipline. Both were aiming for the holistic well-being of the individual. Now, keep in mind, in 1938, psychology was a really young, highly clinical field. It was desperately trying to distance itself from anything remotely resembling mysticism. But Regardie came along and argued, look, the ultimate goal of both the magician and the psychotherapist is identical. They both want the growth, integration, and health of the person on every single level, physical, mental, and emotional. The only real difference, in his eyes, was that magic also explicitly included the goal of spiritual well-being. He basically wanted to tear down those artificial, rigid walls that had been built up between this ancient hermetic art and modern clinical science. Just think about how we label the inner workings of the human mind. Regardie made this brilliant point. What ancient grimoires called gods and angels were simply what modern psychologists, like Carl Jung, for instance, were calling archetypes. And on the flip side, those terrifying demons of occult lore, they were just unaddressed neuroses plaguing the subconscious mind. It's like a giant puzzle clicking into place. By reframing these concepts, Regardie showed that for centuries, magicians weren't actually out there summoning external spirits into triangles. No, they were essentially interacting with the uncharted depths of their own minds. They just happened to use a much older, highly symbolic vocabulary to do it. Suddenly, these mystical rituals were exposed not as supernatural folklore, but as highly structured, completely practical exercises for self-integration and mental health. But to really understand how Regardie developed this radical theory, we have to look back at his highly unusual teenage years. We're tracing a rapid journey from reading ancient texts in Washington, D.C., to packing his bags for France at the tender age of 20. Born in London in 1907, his family relocated to the U.S. when he was 13. He was kind of this prodigy, developing a deep, insatiable interest in yoga and Hindu philosophy really early on. I mean, he practically lived at the Library of Congress. He even found a tutor there to teach him fluent Hebrew, which was a linguistic skill that became absolutely crucial later on for his Kabbalistic studies. But the real turning point hit in 1926. That's when he stumbled upon the writings of the infamous occultist Aleister Crowley. Totally captivated, the young Regardie struck up a correspondence, and by 1928, Crowley had actually offered the 21-year-old a job as his personal secretary over in Paris. Now, to actually make that Paris trip happen, the underage Regardie did something pretty wild. He forged his father's signature on his visa application. His cover story? He told his family he was just heading overseas to study painting. He conveniently left out the tiny detail that his new boss was Aleister Crowley, a guy the British and American tabloids literally dubbed the wickedest man in the world. Regardie fully knew his parents would never, ever approve of him working for a known mystic and international provocateur. So, drawing on the fact that he had briefly attended art school, he just typed up the French visa papers himself, faked the signature, and set off for France to learn magic directly from the most notorious source available. You really can't make this stuff up. Well, as you might guess, that Parisian adventure didn't last very long. The whole thing collapsed in a massive tabloid scandal. Crowley had a really bitter falling out with his own press agent, who immediately ran to the French police, claiming Crowley was a dangerous drug addict. This swift betrayal resulted in instant expulsion papers for Crowley. And Regardie, well, he had actually forgotten to get a valid residence permit, so he got booted from the country right alongside his boss. They relocated to England, but the intense tabloid notoriety scared away all the booksellers, entirely bankrupting Crowley's publisher, Mandrake Press. Unable to be paid and honestly just disillusioned by the constant chaos, Regardie finally drifted away from his mentor. He stepped out of Crowley's massive shadow to formulate his own unique ideas about the mind. So when Regardie finally published his own thoughts in The Middle Pillar, he didn't write some dusty, cryptic grimoire. He structured it as a systematic, step-by-step manual. In part 1, he focuses entirely on the practical mechanics, things like the Tree of Life, the Kabbalistic cross, the pentagram ritual. He wasn't just theorizing from an armchair, he was providing straightforward clinical instructions that literally anyone could follow. Then, moving into part 2, he explicitly tackles that delicate balance between mind and magic. He draws direct, unmistakable lines between the psychological principles of his era and the ancient rituals he had spent years mastering. He was proving, point blank, that they were just two sides of the exact same coin. And he didn't just write about this psychological connection, he mapped it out visually. He deliberately placed modern scientific concepts like Carl Jung's model of the psyche right side by side with ancient protective pentagrams and chakra systems. That was an incredibly audacious move for a published book at the time. By placing Roberto Assagioli's psychological frameworks next to the lesser banishing pentagram, he was making a massive statement. He was treating psychoanalysis and ancient hermetic diagrams on the exact same level. He argued that both were entirely valid, deeply interconnected maps of human consciousness. To Regardie, the therapist chart and the magician's circle were trying to solve the exact same human puzzle. Now imagine dedicating your entire life to uncovering secret knowledge, only to be invited into the ultimate inner sanctum and finding the leaders literally throwing original, priceless historical documents right into the fireplace. Yeah, that was Regardie's actual experience. In 1932, his early, brilliant publications caused a huge stir. This led to a highly sought-after invitation into the Stella Matutina, which was a direct offshoot of the legendary Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. He rose through their mystical grades incredibly fast. But instead of finding this enlightened inner circle of masters, he found lethargic chiefs. They claimed high degrees, sure, but they lacked any actual magical knowledge. And worse, he discovered an appalling habit among this leadership. Out of pure petty jealousy and incompetence, they were actively destroying original order documents rather than passing them on to future initiates. Faced with the permanent extinction of these immensely powerful psychological tools, Regardie made a courageous and, let me tell you, highly controversial choice. He decided to break his vow of secrecy. In the world of Western ceremonial magic, oaths of secrecy were absolute. I mean, they were binding, sacred, and breaking them was completely unthinkable, often carrying heavy threats of spiritual retribution. But Regardie, he looked at the much bigger picture. He saw a comprehensive system of immense psychological and spiritual value just being squandered by a few gatekeepers who were letting it die out of sheer neglect. He decided, right then and there, that the preservation of this knowledge for the whole of humanity was vastly more important than keeping a promise to a fractured organization that had totally lost its way. Regardie realized that true preservation meant public disclosure. He declared that this knowledge shouldn't be locked away in secret societies by a bunch of self-important chiefs. It is, in his own words, the heritage of every man and woman, their spiritual birthright. Rescuing these techniques from the incompetent few meant empowering absolutely everyone. By publishing the complete, unedited rituals of the Golden Dawn and breaking down the psychology behind them, he aimed to clear up widespread public misconceptions about magic. But more importantly, he wanted to ensure that anyone, regardless of their education, their background, or their bank account, could access and genuinely benefit from these extraordinary exercises in personal self-development. By taking secretive concepts like blending the Kabbalistic tree of life with the Eastern chakra system and presenting them as clinical exercises, Regardie essentially democratized self-development. Before Regardie, you would have had to jump through decades of secret initiations, pay exorbitant dues, and swear these intense, binding oaths just to even lay eyes on a concept like the middle pillar exercise. But Regardie argued that a modern psychotherapist could take this exact visualization and use it in a standard clinical setting to help a patient achieve real mental equilibrium. He took magic out of the shadowy, incense-filled temples of London and offered it up as a highly practical, totally accessible tool for the modern mind, a real game changer. Which leaves us with this final, kind of mind-bending thought. The next time you practice a modern visualization or even a corporate mindfulness exercise, could you actually be performing an ancient, fiercely guarded magical ritual? Today, exercises that are very similar to the middle pillar are just standard fare in New Age self-help manuals and modern therapy practices, and often there's absolutely no mention of their deep roots in the Golden Dawn tradition. Israel Regardie foresaw a world where the lines between the magician and the therapist would blur entirely, and he broke the ultimate rules of his time to give us that knowledge. So definitely think about that the next time you do a grounding meditation. You might just be practicing high magic. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you know.